Salvete discipuli. Today we're going to be deciphering, that is, translating into English and explaining the grammar of the very first verse of the Bible. In principio creavit Deus caelum et terram. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, or the heavens and the earth, depending on how you want to translate it. So let's begin. In means in, just like in English. However, there are two ins. The preposition in plus the accusative case has a different meaning from the preposition in plus the ablative case. Okay. So if you use the accusative case, that means into, like man walks into the house. But if you use in plus the ablative case, it's just the normal in. Okay. So you're in the house. And now it doesn't have to be a physical in. This has a whole huge range of meanings. For example, in the Hail Mary prayer, in means among. But for now, in is a fine translation. Okay, now we have to look at this word right here that comes after it. What case is this in? Is this in the accusative case or is it in the ablative case? If we look up the word principium in the dictionary, we get principium / principii, and it's neuter. When you look up a noun in a Latin dictionary, they should give you two forms. The first form is the nominative case, and the second form is the genitive case. And to figure out how words change their endings, you have to look at the second case, the genitive case. Notice it ends in an I. The fact that it ends in an I tells us that this is a second declension noun. Okay. Those second declension, masculine and feminine, decline a little bit differently than second declension neuter. This is a neuter noun. But anyways, the paradigm is going to look like this. So these are the 5 cases of principium. Okay. And so now, how do we know if we're using this one or we're using this one? Well, since it comes after a preposition, we're using the ablative case here. Prepositions almost always use either the accusative case or the ablative case. So in principio, this means in the beginning, or you could also translate this as in the principle, because principium doesn't always mean beginning, but it can mean other types of principles or beginnings as well. Okay. In fact, I think the Hebrew word reshit has a similar range of meanings. Okay, now what about our third word here, creavit? What does this mean? Well, if we look up creavit in the dictionary, the entry is this. And here's our word, creo, creare, creavi, creatus, to create. Okay, this is a verb. These, when you look up a verb in the dictionary, they will have 4 principal parts. The first principal part means I create. The second principal part means to create. It's the infinitive. The third principal part is the first person singular perfect or past tense. So this means I created. And then finally, creatus is the participle. It means created, kind of like an adjective. The one we're using today is here. So how do you put a verb in the perfect tense? All right, so this is how you conjugate any verb in the perfect tense, where you take our third principal part and you change the endings. Okay, so you have creavi, I created. Creavisti, this is you created. Creavit means he, she, or it created. Creavimus means we created. Creavistis means y'all created. So this is you, but plural. And creaverunt means they created. Okay. Now, which one do we have here? This one. He, she, it created. Okay. Now notice here the verb comes before the doer of the verb, that God's the one creating. In English, we would say God created. We wouldn't say created God. That would be weird. But in Latin, the word order is extremely flexible, so you can do that. All right, next up, we have Deus. This means God. But as I mentioned before, the first term, when you look it up in the dictionary, this is the nominative. And you use the nominative when it's the subject of the sentence. So who's doing the action, okay? So God is the subject of the action, creating is the action, it's the verb, and then heaven and earth are going to be the direct object of the action. Okay? We'll get to that later, okay? But like, for example, if God wasn't the one doing the creating, but let's say God was the one being created. Let's say the heaven created God, which would be absurd, but then it wouldn't be Deus, it would be Deum. But since God is the subject of the sentence, it is Deus, the nominative. Caelum et terram. Here we have two nouns, caelum, heaven, terram, earth. Et is a conjunction. Et, this just means and. It can be used in link to nouns like we're doing here, or it can also be used to link to sentences. Caelum's an interesting word because it's neuter in the singular, but in the plural, it's masculine. So let me just show you what that looks like. This is a very odd irregularity. In the plural, we have caeli, caelorum, caelis, caelos, caelis. Okay, this is singular. This is plural. Okay. If these were neuter in the plural, we would expect caela, not caeli. So this is a weird irregularity. But in any case, for neuter, the nominative and the accusative always look identical. Okay. So, okay, as a refresher, nominative means it's the subject. It's the one doing the verb, whereas the accusative marks the direct object. Okay, so if you just had a sentence like this, if you had this could mean heaven created if caelum is in the nominative case. It's the one doing the action. However, since we have God created, then we know caelum isn't the one doing the creating. So in our Bible verse, caelum is in the accusative case. Okay, so accusative case. And what about terram? Okay, well, terram is a first declension noun. This is what you get if you look up terra in a dictionary. We know it's first declension because it ends in an AE. And so the paradigm for any first declension noun is this. Here's the scheme for terra. which means earth. So in the nominative case, terra, this means earth as the subject of the sentence. Genitive case, terre, this means of the earth. Dative means to or for the earth. Accusative case means earth as the direct object of the sentence. And then ablative means it's kind of a catch-all category, but it can mean lots of things like from, by, or with the earth. And has other uses as well. But our word here is terram, so it's the earth as the direct object of the sentence, okay? So notice these are both in the accusative case. So heaven and earth is the direct object of the sentence. Creavit, created, this is the verb. God is the subject. And then here we have a prepositional phrase. This means in the beginning or in the principle. Okay.